The marble streets of ancient Rome were loud with celebration. Flowers fell from balconies. Torches burned through the night. People sang songs about love, fertility, and good fortune. But beneath the music, beneath the laughter, something darker waited for every bride. A Roman wedding was not only a promise. It was a surrender. Before the veil touched her hair, before her name was spoken beside a man's, a young woman had already begun to disappear. Her body, her voice, even her future, none of it truly belonged to her anymore. Rome called it tradition. The gods demanded it. Society applauded it. This is not a story of romance. This is the story of three women, born into different years of Roman power, yet bound by the same invisible chains. Livia Drusilla, married in a world ruled by ambition and blood. Poppaea Sabina, wed under the shadow of an empire that consumed beauty and innocence alike. And Sea Prima, a young bride whose marriage ended just as Mount Vesuvius prepared to bury her city alive. Before they could become wives, they were forced to face rituals no child should ever understand. They were led to temples no bride spoke of openly. They were taught that obedience was holy, silence was strength, and fear was normal. On their wedding day, they were taken, sometimes screaming, sometimes trembling, through the streets, while crowds laughed and sang words too crude to repeat. And when the door finally closed behind them, Roman law erased the girl they once were. Everything we know about these moments survives not because Rome was proud of them, but because later voices were horrified. Christian writers, centuries later, looked back and asked a dangerous question. What kind of civilization celebrates love by first breaking a woman's will? Some of these ancient rituals still echo today, in veils, in thresholds, in customs we no longer question. This is the hidden history of Roman weddings, and it begins before the bride ever says yes. Watch all the way to the end. There's so much valuable info waiting for you. Don't forget to subscribe, tap like, and share this video. Every bit of support helps our channel grow and inspires us to make even better videos for you. Before Livia Drusilla became one of the most powerful women Rome would ever know, she was simply a young girl standing on the edge of a life she did not choose. She was born into an old Roman family, raised to understand one truth above all others. Her body and her future belonged to Rome. Love was never part of the lesson. Duty was. In 38 BC, Rome was still bleeding from civil wars. Power changed hands through betrayal, marriages, and blood. For families like Livia's, a daughter was not a child to be protected. She was a bridge, something to be exchanged to secure safety, loyalty, or influence. Livia was already married once when fate tightened its grip. Her first husband was Tiberius Claudius Nero. She was pregnant with their second child. But politics does not care for vows or unborn lives. Octavian, the man who would later become Emperor Augustus, wanted Livia. Not for love, for control. Roman law allowed it. Her marriage was dissolved. Her body was transferred. Within days, Livia was married again. But before any wedding could take place, tradition demanded obedience to the gods. Roman brides were not prepared gently. In the days before the ceremony, Livia would have been led, quietly, without celebration, to a sacred place that polite society avoided speaking about openly. The temple of Mutunus Tutunus, a fertility god crude and unashamed, whose worship reduced women to a single purpose: bearing sons. Here, brides were expected to perform rituals meant to ensure fertility. Later writers like Augustine and Lactantius would condemn these acts as humiliating and violent in spirit, even when no force was used. The message was clear. A woman's worth began and ended with her womb. For a young woman like Livia, raised among statues of modest goddesses and stories of noble mothers, This moment shattered any illusion of dignity. Silence was expected. Questioning was forbidden. Fear was normal. On the wedding day itself, Rome turned cruelty into theater. Livia would not walk calmly to her new life. Instead, she would be taken. Roman weddings often included a simulated kidnapping. The bride was pulled from her mother's arms, sometimes crying, sometimes resisting, while guests laughed. It was meant to mirror ancient conquests. Rome liked to remember itself as a city born from stolen women. As Livia was carried through the streets, the crowd followed. They sang fescennine verses, dirty, mocking songs filled with sexual jokes and insults. These were meant to protect the couple from evil spirits. But they also stripped the bride of any remaining innocence. Her shame became public entertainment. Her hair was parted with the point of a spear, not a comb, a spear, a reminder that marriage was conquest, not partnership. When Livia crossed the threshold of her new home, she was lifted and carried inside. Some said it was to prevent bad luck. Others knew the deeper truth. Roman tradition claimed brides should not appear too willing to enter a marriage bed. Once the door closed, Roman law completed its final act. Through the ceremony, Livia passed from the authority of her father into the absolute control of her husband. She became property. Her legal identity changed. Her body, her labor, her children, all now belonged to another man. The girl named Livia disappeared that night. In her place stood a Roman wife, strong, silent, watched. History would later remember her as powerful, clever, even dangerous. But power came later. First came submission. First came ritual. First came the quiet understanding that survival, not happiness, was the true goal. And Livia learned that lesson By the time Poppaea Sabina became a bride, Rome no longer pretended to be a republic. It was an empire now, powerful, decadent, dangerous, and beauty had become a weapon. Poppaea was born into privilege. From a young age, people noticed her face, her skin, the careful way she moved through a room. Roman writers would later describe her beauty as almost unnatural, something that made men forget reason. But in Rome, beauty was not a gift. It was a risk. Poppaea learned early that being admired meant being watched. By 62 AD, the empire was ruled by Nero, a man raised on power and cruelty, wrapped in silk and applause. Poppaea was not his first wife. She was not even his first obsession. But when Nero wanted her, wanting became law. Before she could step into the role of empress, Poppaea had to step into the ancient rituals that still governed Roman marriage. Time had passed, emperors had risen and fallen, but the treatment of brides remained unchanged. Like brides before her, Poppaea would have been guided toward fertility rites that polite conversation avoided. Christian writers later spoke with disgust about these practices. They described young women forced to honor gods who symbolized raw male power while pretending it was sacred. The goal was simple: make her fertile, make her obedient, make her silent. Poppaea understood the danger better than most. She knew that her value to Nero lay not in her thoughts, but in her body, and in her ability to give him an heir. On her wedding day, the streets filled again with noise and ritual. The simulated kidnapping still took place. Even a woman as admired as Poppaea was expected to resist, to cry out, to act afraid. A willing bride was seen as shameful. Rome wanted its women conquered even in marriage. The procession moved through the city like a parade. Torches flickered against marble walls. The crowd sang fescennine verses, loud, mocking, filled with sexual threats disguised as jokes. These songs followed Poppaea as she walked, reminding her that her body was now public property, open to comment, ridicule, and desire. Her veil covered her face, but not her fate. Inside the house, the rituals continued. Papia was lifted across the threshold, her feet never touching the ground. Officially, it was to prevent bad luck. Unofficially, it symbolized something darker. A woman should never enter marriage by her own will. Once inside, Roman law erased another piece of her freedom. As Nero's wife, Papia belonged to him completely. Her wealth, her movement, her future, all were tied to his favor. Even her life was not fully her own. In Rome, a husband could punish his wife, control her, and in some cases, kill her with little consequence. For a time, Papia thrived. She wore jewels, bathed in milk, and walked through palaces lined with gold. But a cage made of gold is still a cage. Her marriage did not protect her. It exposed her. When Papia became pregnant, the pressure grew unbearable. An empress who failed to produce a son risked everything. Roman tradition praised motherhood, but punished women whose bodies failed to obey. The end came quietly, violently, and without justice. Ancient sources claim Nero, in a moment of rage, struck Papia while she was pregnant. She died soon after. Whether accident or cruelty, Rome did not hold him accountable. The rituals had promised protection. The gods had been honored. The songs had been sung. None of it saved her. Papia Sabina entered marriage celebrated as Rome's most beautiful bride. She left it as a reminder of how little beauty matters when a woman's life belongs to someone else. Saya Prima was not famous. No poets praised her beauty. No historians recorded her ambitions. And yet, in many ways, her story is the most honest of all. She was an ordinary Roman girl, living in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, in a city filled with noise, color, and life. Pompeii was busy, crowded, and alive with trade, gossip, and tradition. For girls like Saya, marriage was not a dream. It was a certainty. From childhood, she watched weddings pass through the streets. She knew the sounds, the laughter, the songs. She also knew the fear hidden behind painted smiles. By 79 AD, Roman wedding rituals had not softened. They had only become more routine. What had once shocked now felt normal. That was the most dangerous part. Before her wedding, Saya was prepared the way all Roman brides were. Older women guided her, instructing her on what to do and what never to question. Her body was no longer her own. It was something to be shaped, trained, and offered. The fertility rituals still existed, though spoken of quietly. Christian writers like Arnobius would later describe them with anger, calling them proof of moral decay. But for Saya, there was no choice. Tradition demanded obedience, not belief. On her wedding day, Pompeii watched. Saya was dressed in a simple tunic, dyed with a warm color meant to symbolize fertility. Her hair was divided into 6 parts, separated not with a comb, but with a sharp object, echoing ancient violence. A veil covered her face, hiding her fear from the crowd. Then came the taking. She was pulled from her family's arms in a ritual kidnapping. It did not matter that everyone knew it was symbolic. Her fear was real. Her heart raced as if she truly were being stolen, because in a way she was. The procession moved through narrow streets. Neighbors leaned from windows. Children laughed. Men sang fescennine verses, crude songs filled with sexual jokes about what awaited her that night. These words followed her like shadows, reminding her that her body was no longer private. When she reached her husband's house, she was lifted across the threshold. She did not step inside. She was carried. Inside, the ceremony ended. The law took over. Saya became a wife. She now belonged to another household, another authority. Her past life closed behind her like a door. And then, only days later, the ground began to shake. Mount Vesuvius erupted without warning. Ash filled the sky. Streets disappeared. People ran, screamed, prayed. Prima did not have time to grow old as a wife. She did not have time to become a mother. When archaeologists later uncovered Pompeii, they found her name on a tomb. She had been married. That was how she was remembered. Not for who she was, but for who she belonged to. Her marriage lasted only days. But the rituals had already done their work. They had taken her girlhood. They had taken her voice. And finally, history buried what remained. To understand Roman weddings, one must stop looking at the celebration and start looking at what it hides. To the outside world, a Roman marriage appeared joyful. There were flowers, songs, gifts, and feasts. Families gathered. Neighbors watched. The city seemed to approve. But every joyful symbol was built on something much darker. At the center of Roman marriage was control. Before the wedding day, a bride's body was prepared not for happiness, but for ownership. Fertility was everything. A woman who could not produce children, especially sons, was seen as incomplete. Rituals tied to fertility were not optional. They were obligations. Ancient Christian writers later described these practices in detail, not to preserve them, but to condemn them. Augustine, Lactantius, and Arnobius wrote with disgust about the worship of gods who represented raw male power. They were horrified that young brides were expected to honor these gods before marriage, often in ways meant to remove shame and replace it with obedience. These writers were not inventing stories. They were reacting to traditions that were already ancient by their time. The simulated kidnapping was another ritual with deep meaning. Rome told itself a story about its own birth, a city founded when men stole women from neighboring tribes. By reenacting this moment at every wedding, Rome reminded brides of one brutal lesson: marriage is conquest. A woman was expected to resist. A bride who walked calmly into marriage was suspicious. Fear was not only accepted, it was required. Then came the procession. The public songs, the Fescennine verses, were loud and sexual. They were meant to protect against evil spirits, but they also stripped the bride of dignity. Her future body was discussed openly, mocked openly, and claimed openly by the crowd. Shame became entertainment. Even the smallest details carried violence. Hair parted with a spear instead of a comb. A veil to mark separation from her former self. Being carried across the threshold to show that her consent did not matter. And finally, the law completed what ritual began. Roman marriage was not equal. It transferred a woman from one authority to another. In legal terms, she became part of her husband's household in every way. Her body, her labor, her children, and often her wealth were now his. This system did not require cruelty from every husband, but it allowed it, and when cruelty was allowed, it appeared often. The rituals taught women to accept silence, to accept fear, to accept that love was a gift, not a right. By turning violence into tradition, Rome ensured that no one questioned it. When something is sacred, it becomes untouchable. And when no one questions a system, it survives for centuries. Ironically, much of what we know about the darkest parts of Roman weddings survives not because Rome was proud of them, but because later generations were deeply disturbed by them. By the time Christianity began spreading across the Roman world, many of these rituals were already old. They were treated as normal, harmless, traditional, but to Christian thinkers they were shocking. Writers like Augustine, Lactantius, and Arnobius looked back at Roman marriage customs with horror. They were not neutral observers. They were critics, moral judges, and because they were offended, they wrote everything down. Augustine questioned how a society could claim to value family while humiliating women at the very moment they entered marriage. He focused on the contradiction. How could something meant to be sacred begin with shame and fear? Lactantius was even harsher. He mocked the idea that crude jokes, sexual songs, and symbolic violence could protect a marriage from evil. To him, these rituals revealed a society that confused tradition with morality. Arnobius described the fertility rituals with anger and disbelief. He saw them as proof that Roman religion was built on domination, not love. His writings preserve details that Roman authors themselves often avoided, perhaps because they were too familiar or too uncomfortable to examine closely. It is important to understand this clearly. These Christian writers did not invent Roman wedding customs. They reacted to them. Their outrage is evidence of how real these practices were. Without them, much would have been forgotten. Rome preferred to remember its victories, its emperors, its architecture. It did not preserve the quiet suffering of brides. These men wrote to condemn, but in doing so, they preserved voices that would otherwise have been lost. Through their words, we hear echoes of young women being pulled from their families, laughed at by crowds, and legally erased by marriage. Their writings also reveal something else: how deeply tradition can blind a society. Romans did not see these rituals as cruel. They saw them as necessary, protective, meaningful. That is what made them so powerful and so dangerous. By exposing these customs, the Christian writers forced later generations to confront an uncomfortable truth. Civilization can be sophisticated and brutal at the same time, and sometimes the most violent acts are the ones everyone applauds. When modern couples stand together on their wedding day, few imagine that some of their traditions were born in fear, control, and silence. And yet, the echoes are still there. The veil, now seen as a symbol of beauty or mystery, once marked separation. In ancient Rome, it showed that the bride was leaving her old identity behind. She was no longer fully herself. She was becoming someone else, someone owned. Being carried across the threshold remains a playful moment in many weddings today. Cameras flash, guests smile. But in Rome, this act served a darker purpose. It symbolized that a woman should not appear eager to enter marriage. Willingness was suspicious. Resistance was expected. Even the public celebration has roots in exposure. Roman brides were walked through the streets, surrounded by voices commenting on their bodies and their futures. Today, processions are joyful, but the idea that a bride is displayed for public approval still lingers quietly beneath the surface. The language has changed, the meaning has softened, but the structure remains. What makes this history uncomfortable is not that traditions survive. It is that we rarely ask why they began. Roman weddings were not about love. They were about control, inheritance, and power. Marriage turned women into legal objects, and ritual made that transformation feel natural, even holy. The stories of Livia Drusilla, Poppaea Sabina, and Prima remind us that behind every tradition is a human experience. Fear, silence, survival. Livia learned to master the system that trapped her. Poppaea was destroyed by it. Saya disappeared into it without leaving a voice behind. Together, they form a truth Rome never intended to teach. A society can celebrate marriage while quietly taking everything from the bride. History does not ask us to reject tradition. It asks us to understand it, to question it, to decide which echoes deserve to remain and which should finally fade. Because when we forget where customs come from, we risk honoring the pain that created them. And the cold marble of ancient Rome still whispers those lessons, if we are willing to listen.